Hello, everyone. Welcome to Consumer Action's Train the Trainer webinar on helping diverse and multilingual communities avoid consumer fraud. My name is Nelson Santiago, and I am a community outreach manager with Consumer Action, and I'm really glad that you have joined us today. Before moving into the program, I do want to acknowledge that this webinar is possible thanks to a consumer education grant from Amazon. We are especially thankful for Amazon support today because we were able to bring you this webinar just in time for National Consumer Protection Week, which is happening all this week. Special thanks to the Amazon team that made this possible. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Consumer Action, new to Consumer Action, you should know that Consumer Action is a national nonprofit consumer education and advocacy organization founded way back in 1971. Over the years, our educational work has focused on a wide range of consumer issues, usually falling under the broad categories of banking and personal finance, telecommunications, housing, insurance, and privacy. And I'm sure you can imagine that consumer scams and fraud, which we're going to talk about today, come up in all of these sectors. Another thing I want to share about Consumer Action is that we have recognized for decades that in order to reach as many people as possible in communities across the country, we need to make our materials available in multiple languages, and we need to invest in outreach to diverse and multilingual communities. On our homepage, as you can see on the screen in the upper right side, we link to materials in 5 languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. And speaking of scams and fraud, I also want to point out that we produce a monthly Scamgram newsletter, which offers a roundup of the latest scams and which gets delivered to our subscribers every month. By virtue of your attending today's webinar, you should be seeing the Scamgram newsletter in your inbox very soon. Now, let's move into the main part of our program today. We have a wonderful lineup of guest presenters. We're going to hear from Chanel Blunt. She is an impact specialist with the Office of Older Americans at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We're going to hear from Christina Miranda. She's the Senior Project Manager with the Division of Consumer and Business Education at the Federal Trade Commission. Also, Larissa Bungo, Senior Attorney with the Division of Consumer and Business Education at the Federal Trade Commission, and Kathy Stokes, Director of Fraud Prevention with the Fraud Watch Network at AARP, as well as the City Attorney David Shu. He is the City Attorney for San Francisco. Now, we asked all of today's presenters to address 3 questions. Specifically, we wanted to know what needs or problems they may have observed in diverse and multilingual communities related to consumer fraud and scams. And number 2, what initiatives they may have launched or what resources they may have created to help diverse and multilingual consumers avoid fraud. And number 3, what advice they have for community organizations, community educators, community advocates like those of you attending today for helping diverse and multilingual consumers avoid fraud, either by using any of the resources that they will talk about today and which may be available to you, or perhaps by suggesting ways to create your own similar resources to help meet particular needs of consumers in your community. Now, one last thing before I turn over the mic to our first speaker. If you, members of the audience, are aware of a consumer education resource or a tool or publication that you've created that you think is especially helpful in reaching multilingual or diverse consumers, feel free to share it using the question function. We'll put together a resource sheet afterwards and share it. There's several hundred of you on. If you know of a tool, let us know what it is and we'll share it with others. If you have questions for any of our speakers during the webinar, type them into the question function and we will get to them after the presentations. Without further ado, I want to turn the presentation over to Chanel Blunt, who's going to launch this webinar, and I will advance your slides as you need, Chanel. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Nelson and Consumer Action for having us today as we observe National Consumer Protection Week. So as Nelson mentioned, I'm Chanel Blunt, and I'm the Impact Specialist with the Office for Older Americans at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But before I launch into our portion of the presentation, I need to go over this quick disclaimer. This presentation is being made by a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau representative on behalf of the Bureau. It does not constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Any opinions or views stated by the presenter are the presenter's own and may not represent the Bureau's views. This document was used in support of a live discussion, and as such, it does not necessarily express the entirety of that discussion nor the relative emphasis of topics therein. So with that out of the way, Nelson, you can go on to the next slide, please. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB for short. The CFPB is a federal agency that helps make sure banks and lenders treat consumers fairly. The CFPB implements and enforces federal consumer financial laws and ensures that markets for consumer financial products are both fair, transparent, and competitive. Our agency was created in 2010 with the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act, which was drafted in response to the significant financial challenges that came up during the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008. Next slide, please. So here is how the CFPB puts our mission into action with these core functions. We identify and stop practices that harm consumers, enforce consumer financial laws, take consumer complaints and seek responses from service providers. We also provide reliable financial education and information. We research the consumer experience of using financial products, and we also monitor financial markets for new risks to consumers. So in that same light, I would like to highlight our immigrant initiative that speaks to several of those core functions that I just mentioned. The CFPB launched this initiative to better understand the financial experiences of immigrants in the United States. We heard from a wide range of stakeholders about financial needs and challenges facing immigrant consumers. We also conducted interviews and focus groups with immigrant consumers and consumers with limited English proficiency. The insights we have gained inform our work as a regulatory and enforcement agency. And I also want to highlight a few policy and enforcement actions the CFPB has recently taken that are relevant to immigrants. So first, one of the things we heard from stakeholders and consumers is that some immigrants have been denied credit based on their immigration status, despite having strong personal financial circumstances showing an ability to repay a loan, such as a strong credit history, a regular income, employment, or other factors. Like other consumers across the United States, many immigrants borrow to start businesses, purchase automobiles, and buy homes. When financial institutions make decisions based on immigration status rather than credit considerations, immigrant consumers can face more limited access to competitive credit products or must rely on more expensive loan products. The CFPB released a joint policy statement with the Department of Justice reminding financial institutions that they cannot use immigration status to illegally discriminate against people applying for credit. Lenders may consider immigration status while evaluating a credit application, but the statement reminds them that they may not use immigration status as an excuse for illegal discrimination on the basis of national origin or another protected basis. Secondly, the CFPB released a report focused on our efforts to protect consumers from illegal junk fees. Among the various junk fees discussed in the report are fees charged by remittance and transfer providers without proper disclosure, and the failure of remittance transfer providers to refund fees when the money sent by consumers failed to arrive on time. Many remittance senders, of course, are immigrants who are sending critical financial support to loved ones abroad. Next slide, please. One back, Nelson. Thank you. So the law that created our agency, the Dodd-Frank Act, also mandated that the CFPB have an office for older Americans. We address issues for those 62 and older, but also for their families and caregivers, as well as professionals and intermediaries. The goal of our office is to, or the goals of our office are to protect older consumers from financial harm and help them navigate key financial moments as they grow older, identify and address emerging consumer protection risks, help older adults recognize the signs of unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices and protect themselves, coordinate our efforts with federal agencies and state regulators to promote consistent, effective, and efficient enforcement. We also work on a variety of issues affecting the older adult population, such as housing issues, age-friendly banking, debt, and elder financial exploitation. We work collaboratively with a variety of national and state organizations, such as the Diverse Elders Coalition and its member organizations, the National Center and Caucus on Black Aging, National Hispanic Council on Aging, National Indian Council on Aging, National Asian Pacific Center on Aging, the American Society on Aging, as well as several faith-based organizations and state attorneys general as well. We work collaboratively with these groups and many others to take information into the Bureau in order to best serve these diverse populations and their unique financial circumstances. And we do that through a variety of outreach methods, such as roundtables, listening sessions, and interviews with both consumer and stakeholder audiences. We gather feedback on emerging issues that are affecting their populations and use it to inform our policy and program initiatives. Let's get into some specifics on how scams and fraud affect older consumers. Next slide, please. So this first slide depicts the top categories of fraud losses by those who are over the age of 60 and is broken down by ethnicity. And this slide and the next slide are both from the FTC's 2023 report on protecting older consumers. So as you can see, those in the AAPI or Asian American Pacific Islander community experience fraud loss via investment scams at over twice the rate of other ethnic groups. This type of scam also generates the greatest dollar amount losses overall. Business imposter scams appear to affect those in the Latino community the most, while prizes and lottery scams are where those in the Black community experience the greatest amount of fraud loss. Next slide, please. So to add some additional insights, this slide shows how the same ethnic groups were contacted by fraudsters. Those in the Black community tended to be contacted more often via phone. According to the report, the largest share of these losses were to scams impersonating the publisher's clearinghouse, which is very popular. And those in the AAPI community were overwhelmingly targeted through social media platforms via the investment scams that were mentioned in the previous slide. So now that we have some information on what kind of scams are out there and how different communities are affected by them, I want to introduce you to some CFPB resources you can use to help fight back against fraud. Next slide, please. Money Smart for Older Adults is a volunteer-led curriculum and tool designed to help older adults, family caregivers, and others prevent, recognize, and report financial exploitation. We created this program in collaboration with the FDIC, and it has several different modules on different scams, as well as pre and post tests that come in handy to test your group and individuals on what they've just learned. So within this Money Smart for Older Adults program, we've got placemats, handouts, and bookmarks, and those cover bite-sized information on common scams such as romance scams, Medicare ID fraud, and cyber scams, and many more. Also within this program, but it's not pictured on the slide here, is our Managing Someone Else's Money Guides, which cover the 4 different financial caregiver types and what their responsibilities are in each role. And Money Smart for Older Adults, as well as our Managing Someone Else's Money Guides, are available in English and Spanish. Not pictured on the screen right now are our just-in-time housing guides. These are just-in-time resources for those who own a home and are at 4 critical decision points. So it's either those experiencing the loss of a spouse or partner, those navigating a change in health, how to leave your home to your children or heirs, and using the equity in your home to meet financial needs. Those housing guides have been user tested and are available in English, as well as Spanish, Chinese, Haitian Creole, Korean, Tagalog, Russian, and Vietnamese. The non-English guides that I just mentioned are available for download, but the English is available to order in bulk. And as I mentioned earlier, a core part of our mission in the Office for Older Americans is stakeholder collaboration. And to that end, we have developed an Elder Justice Networks initiative, complete with a guide on how to develop and grow networks. So an Elder Justice Network is a sustained, collaborative, and volunteer effort partnership that works to prevent, detect, and/or respond to elder financial exploitation. These networks aim to increase reporting and interagency referral of cases, improve response to cases of financial exploitation, enhance members' skills and capacity to address financial exploitation, improve coordination, including the use of agency and community resources, as well as increase collaboration on investigations. These networks are spread across the United States, and they serve a variety of local and regional areas that help meet the unique needs of their older populations. And for more information about that program and the development guide, you can visit consumerfinance.gov/elder networks. Next slide, please. So another resource that may help you serve the financial needs of those you work with who are multilingual is a translated glossary of financial terms. Created in 2015, these glossaries of financial words and terms that we frequently use when creating our content. We translated those words and terms into Spanish and Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Tagalog. More recently, we expanded the glossaries, and they now contain over 1,200 financial words and terms. So we did this in partnership with other agencies and organizations who also had glossaries, like the FHFA, Federal Housing Finance Agency, FDIC, DOJ, IRS, FTC, Social Security Administration, as well as Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, GSA, and the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. And you can find these glossaries at consumerfinance.gov/language. So all the resources that I've mentioned in this presentation are available for you to use for free. And another way to bring our resources to your community is through co-branding. So you can print our booklets, order them, print them, handouts and fact sheets, and add your organization's logo. We're the federal government, so the information that we put out to the public is not copyrighted. So you can co-brand at no additional cost. We have a variety of financial guides, such as our guides for newcomers that are a great resource for those to the United States and or have limited English proficiency. We also have a library of recorded webinars and trainings available for you to use on demand at youtube.com/@ and CFPB Live. And if you're having an issue with a financial product or service, you can file a complaint with us. We have an online form at consumerfinance.gov and also take complaints via phone. One other resource I'd like to highlight is CFPB. And if you've got any kind of more general money questions, we've got answers to those questions at consumerfinance.gov/askcfpb. And if you've got any other questions or suggestions for us, feel free to reach out to us at olderamericans@cfpb.gov. Thank you very much. Nelson, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Chanel. Thank you for that presentation. We can let you know what questions we have for you after we hear from the other presenters. We're next going to hear from Christina Miranda and Larissa Bongo of the Federal Trade Commission. And Christina, we want to make sure that you're unmuted. We do see you here. I'm going to go ahead and advance to the first slide for you all.
Thank you again for that very warm introduction, Nelson. I just want to begin. My name is Christina Miranda, and I work at the Federal Trade Commission's Division of Consumer and Business Education. The FTC is committed to serving every community and reaching diverse audiences with linguistically and culturally appropriate educational resources. So after a brief introduction about the Federal Trade Commission and our work with the Division of Consumer and Business Education, I'm going to show you our first examples of how the FTC created a targeted campaign using a graphic novel series, which we call fotonovelas in Spanish, to reach Latino consumers. Then my colleague Larissa Bongo will provide other concrete examples of how the FTC is responding to the needs of diverse communities with resources in times of need. And in particular, she'll share a resource we created in language to help people recovering from the Hawaii wildfires. And then we'll finish up by sharing our new in-language resources and reporting tools for scams and also ID theft. So let's get started with a brief overview of the FTC and the Division of Consumer and Business Education. Next slide, please. So as the nation's consumer protection agency, the Federal Trade Commission works to stop fraud, deception, and unfair business practices and protect all communities, including immigrants, from bad business practices. And this is done in several different ways. We do this through enforcement, meaning that the FTC does investigations sues companies and people that break the law and tries to get money back to people whenever possible. And also we do this through education and outreach. And that means the FTC tells people about their rights and businesses about their responsibilities. But obviously the Federal Trade Commission can't do this alone. So by working with groups like the network of organizations represented here today, the FTC tries to amplify its messages and reach a broader audience. Building partnerships with trusted sources in the communities we serve is key in the fight against all of these scams. And so we hope that after our presentation today that we can continue working with all of you on this end. Next slide, please. So let's start with ftc.gov/graphic novels or ftc.gov/fotonovelas in Spanish. Now these fotonovelas, as you see here on the screen, offer practical advice to help spot and report common scams. And the stories are based on reports to the FTC from Spanish speakers and also FTC cases like Oro Marketing Inc., which for example targeted Hispanic consumers with income scams and also scams that we've heard from community partners. But the scams in consumer advice are relevant to all communities. Now, the fotonovelas are an effective educational tool because they're really easy to read and they use storytelling to engage the reader and offer practical advice to help spot and avoid some common scams. And also we know that fotonovelas are used in Latin American countries to educate people about health issues, government services, and other topics. So we know it's a format that many people who come from Latin America are used to, and therefore they're more likely to pick them up, read, and share them. We have 8 fotonovelas in total, and each fotonovela tells the story of people who experience a scam or a bad business practice, how they deal with it, and what they learn from the experience. Next slide, please. So government impersonator scams is one of the most popular fotonovelas that we produced. For years, impersonator scams have topped the list of scams reported to the Federal Trade Commission. In fact, according to the Consumer Sentinel Data Book 2023, imposter scams remain the top fraud category with reported losses of $2.7 billion. Now, scammers pretend to be someone you trust, like a government official, a business, a friend or family member, or a potential love interest, and they always try to get your money or personal information. And in this particular fotonovela, that's exactly Sonia's experience. She gets a call from someone saying that they're from the government and she wants some money, but after sending the money, she realizes it was a scam. And so what Sonia learns in this fotonovela is that if someone calls you, says they work for the government, and says you won money through a grant, a lottery, or contest, it's a scam. Hang up and don't respond to the message. If someone tells you to pay by wiring money, gift card, or cryptocurrency, it's a scam as well. Don't pay, because anyone who tells you to pay that way is a scammer. Next slide, please. So we've also seen in our law enforcement work dishonest companies targeting Latino consumers with bogus business opportunities. And that's what the income scams fotonovela that you see here on the screen is based on. So it tells the story of 2 friends, Rocio and Fatima, who are looking to make some extra money. And the story is based on a case that the Federal Trade Commission filed against a company that promoted work at home opportunities to resell products. And after investing hundreds of dollars, most people didn't get what they promised, or they got bad quality products that they really couldn't sell. So scammers make promises about making money that simply aren't real, and they demand money up front or ask for sensitive information like your social security number. And if you give it to them, they might steal your identity, take your money, or both. And in this fotonovela, Fatima avoids the scams because her friend Rocio shares what happened to her. And she learned that if you're considering a money-making opportunity, number 1, you need to search online and look up the company's name, email address, or phone number, plus the word scam, review, or complaint. Number 2, talk to someone that you trust and describe the offer or the job to them and ask them what they think. And then avoid any company that tries to pressure you. And that means stop communicating with anyone who uses high pressure sales tactics, tells you to act now, or discourages you from checking out the company. Next slide, please. This next one is very, very important. If you work with immigrants, you've probably heard of notario scams. And notario scams are another example of a scam we know impacts Latinos. And that's when someone promises legal help with immigration, but they're not a lawyer or an accountant or a consultant or notary. and they aren't authorized to give immigration advice. And in this fotonovela, Pedro avoids a scam after hearing about his cousin's experience, asking questions and talking to a friend. Now, in many Latin American countries, the term notario means that a person's an attorney or has legal training, but that's not true of the similar term notary public in the United States. And in the US, notaries and accountants can't give you legal advice. Only lawyers or an accredited representative authorized by the US Department of Justice can give you legal advice on immigration. Anyone else is just taking your money, and sometimes their bad advice will hurt your chance to immigrate lawfully or adjust your legal status. So what we mentioned in this fotonovela to avoid an immigration scam is, number one, don't go to a notario or notario público for immigration help, and never pay a notario up front. Never sign a blank form or form with false information, and don't let anyone keep your original documents. Don't pay for immigration forms because they're free at uscis.gov. And remember that only a lawyer or an accredited representative authorized by the US Department of Justice can give you legal advice. And you can get started at finding real immigration help at ftc.gov/immigration. That's it for my side of the presentation. I'm going to pass this presentation on now to my great colleague, Larissa Bongo. Go ahead, Larissa.
Thank you so much, Christina. Another example of how the FTC is responding to the needs of all communities is a resource we created in the wake of the Hawaii wildfires. In response to the devastation, the FTC made its resource Picking Up the Pieces After a Disaster available at ftc.gov/weather/Hawaii, what you see pictured on this slide here. And it was available in multiple languages needed on Maui, including Japanese, Tagalog, and Tongan. The guidance includes how to avoid cleanup repair scams, spot impersonator scams, and how to get back on track financially. It's a concrete example of the FTC's efforts to serve and reach every community. And through relationships with partners on the ground, we were able to get the resource into the hands of people who needed the guidance. Next slide, please. We know that scammers speak the languages that we speak at home, and the FTC has information in a dozen languages to help people spot and avoid scams at ftc.gov/languages. At ftc.gov/languages, you'll get all the basics on how to spot and avoid a scam. What are the signs to watch for? What do you do if you spot those signs? What to do if you paid a scammer or if you think you did. There can be ways to recover your money, sometimes if you act very quickly. And here you will learn what to do. There's also a resource on what to know if you're newly arrived in the United States. Unfortunately, we know that scammers target people new to the US and new to our systems and cultures. So this resource shares how to spot some of the scams related to looking for a job, going through the immigration process, or just figuring out how things work. We also have a resource on how to spot, avoid, and report identity theft in your language. We have a new resource to help you know what identity theft is, how to spot it, .gov/languages. It is easy to download each of these publications. You can make copies to distribute them or share the links to help communities spot and avoid scams. You'll also find graphics in each language to share on social media. You can tag at FTC or at LAFTC to help others in your community know how to spot, avoid, and report fraud. Since many people better understand information on paper than online, how to avoid a scam, scams in your small business, and how to spot, avoid, and report identity theft in your language are available in print to be ordered and shipped for free from the FTC's bulk order site in Chinese, Korean, Spanish, Vietnamese, along with English. That's ftc.gov/bulk order. Again, our resources live in the public domain. There's no copyright concerns or permission needed to use it. We very much appreciate the opportunity to share our resources and hope that you will share with others. Moving to the next slide, please. Where do you report fraud? In addition to resources, we offer a way for people to report the scams that they see in their communities in their preferred language and to get help with next steps. This piece is so important in the fight against scams. We know that scammers don't just scam one person. Chances are that others in the community are having similar experiences. So we're hoping that if folks see or experience fraud, scam, or any bad business practice, you can help your community, help protect your friends, your family by reporting it to the FTC. Every time you report to the FTC, you give a piece of the puzzle that helps build cases, stop scammers, and also alert others about the current trends. In just a few short steps, you can report fraud in English at reportfraud.ftc.gov and in Spanish at reportefraud.ftc.gov. And I'll tell you next how to report fraud in other languages. We know that not everyone feels comfortable providing information to a government database, but you can submit the report anonymously or work with an advocate or someone else who can help report on your behalf. I think we advanced one slide ahead, but just a reminder, to report scams in other languages, you can call 877-382-4357, press 3 to select your preferred language and get help with next steps. The phone lines are open between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. We could go to the next slide, please. We do also take identity theft reports in multiple languages. To report identity theft, call 877-438-4338, press 3 to get help on what to do next in your preferred language and complete a report. Again, the phone lines are open between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Or you can report identity theft online in English at identitytheft.gov or in Spanish at robodeidentidad.gov. These are just some of the things that the FTC is doing to better serve every community. We are also working with ethnic media, hosting briefings, placing in-language ads in print and on the radio, and expanding our team to include some language and language specialists. So again, we really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and look forward to answering any questions that you have later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larissa, for that presentation. We are going to move on now to Kathy Stokes, the Director of Fraud Prevention with the Fraud Watch Network at AARP. Kathy,
Hey, Nelson.
I see you on.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you good.
Wonderful. If you could switch to my presentation. Thank you. We'll go to the next slide, please. As Nelson said, I'm with AARP. It's kind of a confusing organization, so I like to level set by saying there are 3 parts. One is the foundation where we do our charitable work. One is a for-profit called AARP Services, where the people that work there get the great benefits and discounts for our roughly 38 million members. And then the part of the organization I sit in is AARP Incorporated, and it is where our social mission work happens, and that's the home of the Fraud Watch Network that I run. Next slide. The Fraud Watch Network is really all about education and supporting victims of fraud. We have a great website at aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork. From there, you can sign up for biweekly watchdog alerts. You can check out our scam map. You can connect to our amazing podcast, The Perfect Scam. We also have a range of victim support resources, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we also work with our advocacy team to try to make things better in this space for people. Next slide. Our Fraud Watch Network helpline last year probably got somewhere around 98,000 calls. So we do hear from people in real time with the experiences that they're having out there in the world of fraud. It's not just members though. You can call it no matter of your age, no matter of your membership status with AARP. You can report a scam. We share that information with our friends at the FTC. You can ask if that Publishers Clearinghouse letter that you got that looks so real and that you want to be so real is actually legitimate. Hint, it's usually not. And then, get help if you have been victimized by fraud or a family member has. Jot this number down because, as I said, anybody can have access to our fraud specialists who are trained with empathy in mind. 877-908-3360. Next slide. Very quickly, also, I just want to mention that we have an online victim support program. I think we're going into our 3rd year. We learned that the helpline is great, but a lot of people suffer a significant emotional impact when they experience fraud. So we started these 1-hour online sessions through Zoom meetings, and people tell us they find them very empowering and supportive. Again, this is something that's available to anybody who needs it. If you want to learn more about it, please head over to aarp.org/fraud support. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the wealth of diverse audience research that AARP has just in the space of scams and fraud. We've done a lot, and these are just some examples. We've done work on veterans, on the experience in the Hispanic Latino community and the African American Black community. I'm going to focus on that today. And just last year, we did focus groups and sessions to get an idea of what the fraud experience is among Indigenous communities. And if you go to aarp.org research/research, or just Google research, you can find all this kind of stuff there. Next slide. So I'm going to dig into the study that we did in 2021 that we got a lot of really good information out of. If you could switch to the next slide, the consumer fraud experience among African American Blacks. Go ahead and switch, please. Thank you. So going into it, we couldn't make an assumption that the same scams that are affecting the general population, which we're aware of, were also affecting this particular community. So we did a little bit of preparation ahead of time. We talked with friends at the Federal Trade Commission, consumer advocates, educators from the Black community to help understand what they were hearing. And we did a series of discussions also with NOBLE, the National Order of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And with that, we were able to inform our survey instrument so that we were asking the kind of questions that would resonate in the Black community. Next slide. I'm going to go through a bunch of different slides from the research itself. Go ahead, next slide. And just touch really quickly on them. Next slide. A couple of things to point out that we learned that Black adults most often encounter scams like government imposter, lottery, work from home scams, and where they are becoming victims of scams, they cite grandparent, work from home, and affinity/investment scams the most. And we did find in this and other research that a troubling trend across all racial groups is that if you've experienced a scam once, more than half of those people have experienced more than one fraud incident. Next slide. We found that TV is a very trusted advertising source among Black adults. And why would that matter? Because we find out that if you trust highly 3 or more sources of advertising, then it puts you in a situation potentially of risk. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see why. And what we find here is that relationship between trust and advertising. And in this case, we found that among Black adults that trust 3 or more ad sources, they're way more likely to share personal information by entering contests. And that's a pretty high risk vector, unfortunately. Whereas if you don't trust anything, any ad source, then that incidence is virtually non-existent. Next slide. We also saw the highest incidence when we compared Black adults to Latino and white adults. They have the highest incidence of answering calls from somebody they don't know, and we know that there's risk there. Next slide. and that 6 in 10 Black adults report using the same or similar passwords on fewer accounts. And we know that that is a risk as well. Next slide. And we also found that even though 6 in 10 Black adults use protective software on their devices, the rates are a little lower than the white community, but in other racial groups, but well above the Latino community. So we found a real risk there when we did the Hispanic Latino study. Next. So that's just a general idea. It's a very deep survey and study. So if you want to take a look at it, we can get you the link to it. But we leveraged this research in a bunch of different ways. We did a satellite media tour, which is what we do with all of our fraud research. This one was led by our Vice President of ODEI Audience Strategy. And then that office shared the research widely across their relationships, which are primary business to business rather than business to consumer. Our state offices, we have 53 of them around the country. They incorporated these findings into their community presentations when they're out there with their volunteer fraud fighters sharing the message of fraud prevention. And we also did, which I think was really important, a roundtable with Black journalists. We did one with the National Newspapers Publishers Association. And the point we were trying to make is like, look, this community is not hearing enough about these scams. It's not registering for them, and we really all need to be communicating more about what they are so that education is sort of in surround sound. Next slide. And I just want to spend a minute or two on the narrative that we currently have where we tend to blame victims for the fraud they experience. And this is something that applies to all audiences, diverse audiences, general population audiences, something that we can all take home in the work that we do. Next slide, please. I just want to make the point that scams are successful not because there's something wrong with the person who was on the other end of that scam. It's because they have a playbook, and that playbook says get that target into a heightened emotional state, whether it's fear or excitement or panic. It's what they call getting them under the ether. And when we're there, we have a really hard time backing out of that emotion to access logic. Next slide, please. So we generally see the playbook in probably 80% of all scams. You could see it's a contact from out of the blue that yields a high emotion, like the risk, like the fear or panic, and it contains urgency, and that urgency is usually you got to send money right away. Those things come together, and we just have a really hard time because of brain physiology getting into the space of logic. So all of this to say, it's not the victim's fault. The criminals are good at what they do. They've been using a playbook since time immemorial. Next slide. And the way that we can begin to change how we think about fraud victims is the way we talk about fraud victims. So where we typically use language that implies blame or inspires shame, instead of saying something like, you got scammed, or how could you fall for that, or using words like duped and swindled and tricked, why don't we say, hey, this isn't your fault. These criminals are really good at what they do, and you experienced a crime. And what does that say to the person? It's not their fault. You're empathizing with their with what happened to them, and possibly even empowers them to get mad and want to do something about it. And what that action could be is reporting. We know we have a massive underreporting problem here. Next slide. And, it's time to focus on the criminals. So if you could just click through this once for me once. We use terms like fraudster, scammer, con artist. Next click. But instead, another click. I didn't realize this was still doing this way. Sorry, guys. Let's use words like criminal and perpetrator. Fraudster actually kind of sounds cute. Con artist sounds clever. Let's use the words that apply to the criminal action, the criminality of this. Click once more. And instead of saying something like, she gave him her money, listen to the difference if instead you say, click, and one more, a criminal stole her money. It's a slight difference, but so important in the ears of the listener. Next slide. And, you know, if we begin to choose our words with intention, if we do a heck of a lot more than we're doing right now in supporting victims of these crimes, if we broaden the portrayal and stop making everybody just assume that this only happens to older adults and older adults always have cognitive decline. Those are just horrible assumptions and tropes out there. Broaden those portrayals. We know through the Federal Trade Commission that younger people experience fraud losses more often. It's just that the older adults have so much more that they lose. Humanize through storytelling. We do that with our podcast, The Perfect Scam, for example. And last but certainly not least, let's go after the people that are harming our society and the individual in our society. Go after the criminals. Next slide. We think some of the real world outcomes could be more reporting, family relationships protected instead of torn asunder because of the experience. Police may understand that this crime is serious and take it more seriously. Maybe prosecutors will be able to take more cases in front of juries. Maybe policy makers would act, and the billions of dollars that are leaving our economy through fraud would stay in our economy. Next slide. We are mounting an effort at aarp.org/wordsmatter. Please check it out for resources now and in the future to help consumers as well as professional audiences who are in the fraud space, you know, get used to language that is empathetic and doesn't judge. And Nelson, back to you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that presentation. For our final speaker is going to be City Attorney David Chu, and he is tied up until 11. So we're going to move to questions first, and then return to his presentation after we get started with questions. So I'll just advance through the slides quickly to get us, and then we'll work our way back. For the Q&A, we also have helping us out with questions, Carmen Cruz, who is a financial education program analyst with the Office of Financial Education at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and she's here to support Chanel. And we also have Ronald Lee, who's a deputy city attorney for San Francisco. He'll be here to help support David Chu, City Attorney David Chu, with questions. And helping us out with questions is Monica Steinish with our office. Monica, if you're there, we can get started with questions, and I will monitor for City Attorney David Chu, and then we'll interrupt and go to his presentation.
All right, thanks very much, Nelson. I've seen a lot of good feedback in the comments about this presentation, so thanks for all the great information. There are some questions, and one of them is, are representatives from the FTC, CFPB, or AARP available to make presentations in local communities?
I'll quickly take that from AARP. Absolutely. We have volunteers all across the country that work with our 53 state offices, and that's exactly what they do. They go out into community with partners, go to libraries and other places like that to do presentations on fraud prevention.
Great. Kathy, one person asked if you have to be a member to access AARP resources.
You do not.
Okay, okay.
And for the FTC, the question of do we have people who can go into the communities? Absolutely. And I'm happy to share my email if that would be helpful. If anyone would like to reach out, we do have regional offices across the country as well as our headquarters in DC, and are happy to provide spokespersons to join. My email is L for Larissa, Bungo, B like boy, U, N like Nancy, GO @ftc.gov.
Great.
And for the CFPB, we do not have any regional or state offices, and we're a pretty small team with the Office for Older Americans, but you can try to reach out to us at olderamericans@cfpb.gov. We do have people who do kind of regular presentations, but I also really encourage people to go to YouTube and go to our CFPB Live. There we have a lot of existing presentations and webinars that you can also access.
Great. Thanks.
Larissa, can you please repeat your email? I'm going to type it in the chat for everyone.
Of course. So L for Larissa, Bungo, like my last name, B as in boy, UN like Nancy, GO, and then it's at ftc.gov.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. One of our attendees would like to know, and I'm sure many would like to know, what can I do as a caregiver to protect my senior parents from fraud? And this is for anybody.
Kathy can start again. You know, really it comes down to making it a habit to talk with your parents and aunts and uncles and friends. And we have to talk more about the fraud that's happening out there. The FINRA Investor Education Foundation did a study back in around 2019, and they found that if you know about a specific scam, you're 80% less likely to engage with it, and 40% less likely still to lose money or sensitive information if you do engage. And so how do you know about them? We talk about them. You know, you share the newsletters, or, you know, AARP has a watchdog alert that comes out every 2 weeks, and let that email remind you to talk to your mom and dad about the latest scam. I really think it's a lot more about communication than anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is Larissa. I'd like to piggyback on Kathy. I agree with that very much. Talking about a scam is so important, both for education, so folks know about the scams that are going around, but also as a reminder as something is happening, because we know that there are some signs of a scam. You know, it's typically that there's a call, text, email that comes out of the blue, so it's something unexpected, and then it's one of, you know, what I'll call the 3 Ps. It's going to be a problem or a prize, there'll be pressure to do something, and then there's usually payment involved or personal information that the scam artist wants from us. So as our elders are receiving these phone calls, texts, and messages, I think it is very important that we ask them to reach out to us. So think for a moment as it's happening. You know, that if something is happening out of the blue, reach out to one of us. If you talk to someone about something that's happened to you, more than likely you might realize, oh, this sounds odd. Or, you know, the scammer might say, I don't want you to get in touch with the grandchild, for example, in the case of the family emergency scam. But if you reach out to your son or your daughter, you realize the grandchild is just fine. So I think it's really important to communicate also when the scam artist has reached out. So communication is key. Thank you.
Yeah, and in addition to the communication piece, you can also be added as a trusted contact to your mother or father's or loved one's account. And then if there's any kind of suspected financial impropriety, the bank will then, or financial institution will be obligated to alert you.
Great, thanks. We've gotten a number of comments about the photonovellas. One person said photonovellas are amazing, culturally adaptive tool to engage the demographic, very creative. And so people would like to know if there are similar resources in other languages, that type of very, you know, culturally adaptive tool.
Thank you so much for that feedback. At this time, we don't have the photonovellas in other languages as of yet, but it is something that we hope to be creating. So very much appreciate that feedback. So more to come on that.
More to come. If someone was scammed 2 years ago and lost money, can they still get help?
This is Larissa. I'll try to help here. I'm not sure if the question, what the question is exactly, but it's still worthwhile to report, definitely. So for example, you know, there are many times where, as I mentioned, reporting is important for enforcement efforts as well as for creating awareness so that we can share what we know with our communities. It sometimes takes a while before law enforcement actions can become a matter in litigation. So it matters to file reports, even if it has been some time since one has lost money. It could be that the matter has been filed and there's a refund available. So there's all kinds of reasons why it's still important to file a report, and I would encourage it.
Great.
Monica, if I could interrupt, let
Yeah.
me see if we can hear from City Attorney David Chu. He's joined, but we want to make sure we have his audio.
Okay.
Hello, City Attorney Chu. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome, City Attorney Chu.
Thank
How are you
you.
doing?
I'm doing great.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. I'm going to back up to the part of the presentation where you can make a presentation. And then we will continue with questions for you. And I know that Roland Lee is also on to help with questions afterwards. So
Great.
welcome,
Thank you.
welcome, and here's your first slide.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is David Chu. I'm the City Attorney of San Francisco. And let me first start by wishing you and everyone a great National Consumer Protection Week, and just appreciate consumer action and all the advocates who are on the call. Little by way of background, previously I was a public interest attorney, but spent time as a local and state legislator in San Francisco and California, and I now run a public law office out of San Francisco. And understand I was asked to talk about the role not just of our office, but of local public law offices that have the ability to enforce consumer laws and stand up for consumers, and the work that we do in conjunction with community-based organizations to do this. So let's go to the next slide. Just have a couple slides about who we are, what we do, and how we can work together. Next slide. So our office, like many city attorney and county council offices around the country, typically established under city charters or constitutions. We are not our district attorney's office, so that's a distinction. Many of our offices, city attorneys and county councils around the country, we focus on civil law as opposed to criminal law. While we don't represent individual members of the public and we're representing our city, or in our instance, I can bring cases on behalf of the people of the state of California, we are obviously doing this with the public interest in mind. In our office, we're an independent office. I'm accountable to San Francisco voters. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm just trying to jump through the things that are probably most relevant to all of you. I oversee a couple hundred legal professionals and provide advice to over 100 different city departments, boards, and commissions, including most of the elected officials in my city, and that includes our mayor and our city council. Next slide. So what's probably most relevant is offices like mine, we can bring lawsuits when the city interests have been harmed. And what that has meant in San Francisco, we're famous, our office is famous for establishing the right for LGBTQ couples to marry. We had dozens of matters of litigation with the former President Trump. We can bring lawsuits on behalf of our state, as I mentioned before, when corporate defendants are engaged in unlawful, unfair, or fraudulent practices under California state law. There are very typically statutes like this in most states in our country. The priorities that we've laid out for affirmative litigation is in the civil rights context with regard to immigrant rights, reproductive rights, with regard to climate change, with regards to housing, with regards to workers' rights, and then obviously today we're talking about consumer protection. And to give you a sense of cases we've brought over the years, we've successfully sued the opioid industry and brought $350 million back to San Francisco last year on that topic. We've sued the lead paint industry and got a $1.1 billion judgment on behalf of consumers of lead paint products. sued gun manufacturers, payday lenders, refuse collectors, folks involved in false and deceptive advertising. The remedies in many of these cases involve restitution back to, say, consumers who've been defrauded, court orders, injunctions, monetary penalties, etc. Next slide. Want to give just a couple of examples of consumer protection actions that we've brought just in this past year. So to give you an example, we learned that there was a company that was targeting small businesses with mailers appearing to be from government entities saying that you need to pay for basically employment posters or employer posters that you're supposed to put up at your workplace saying that the minimum wage in the state is X, etc. But they sent basically misleading mailings to pay a private company, things that you could just request from government. So that was oftentimes, again, targeting small businesses. In another completely different instance, we unfortunately had a non-lawyer in one of our major Latino immigrant communities who was running a sham immigration consulting firm, charging for fraudulent legal services. So literally taking thousands of dollars from immigrants seeking legalization status and putting those individuals at risk. On a completely different matter, we learned from consumers about gift cards. So during the holiday season, people purchase a lot of gift cards. Turns out that many of them purchased gift cards that had been drained of their value due to inadequate security in the packaging of these gift cards, and then they would subsequently fail to provide refunds to those very consumers, harming not just low-income Californians, but Americans across the country. There have been complaints about this all over the United States, so we have brought an action against that company. And then on a totally different front, we have laws in California that govern flavored tobacco products and e-cigarettes, and we recently brought a suit against a number of online tobacco retailers who are unlawfully selling those products, and in particular targeting young people. So this gives you just a sense of the wide breadth of cases that offices like ours are able to bring, as all of you as advocates are thinking of who you can partner with in this work. Next slide. So community organizations and advocates, as you can imagine, play a really critical part of our work, both in identifying emerging issues and bad actors out there, identifying misconduct that may otherwise go unreported. One thing to note is that oftentimes offices like ours don't face the same procedural hurdles that a consumer who's represented by a private attorney might have to face. So for example, oftentimes a consumer, when they purchase a product or receive a product, are essentially agreeing to arbitration clauses that make it very difficult to incent a private lawyer to take up a case. Offices like ours, we are not party to those agreements, so we can actually bring lawsuits against companies despite those arbitration clauses. Our actions are not considered class action suits, and so we have the ability, class actions, so we have the ability to secure broader relief. And if an office like ours takes on a public enforcement action, we have the ability, because we are government, to bring more attention and visibility and really amplify the issues, particularly if there are companies or individuals that are defrauding vulnerable communities that we are seeking to serve. Next slide. So just want to mention on our website, we have a complaint portal where folks can report complaints online. For those of you who are in other states and other jurisdictions, you might want to suggest to offices like ours that they have an ability to receive complaints online. We allow complaints to be submitted anonymously or through representatives. It's available in multiple languages. Next slide. And I think this is the final slide. What we always tell the public is, certainly we investigate and take action where it's appropriate, but we also can make referrals to other agencies if there's conduct outside our jurisdiction. Really want to thank the work of folks I know on this call from the FTC and the CFPB for their work at the federal level. We work closely with state agencies as well. We obviously can't respond to all complaints given limited resources, but we want to kind of seek out the most egregious behavior, do what we can if there's stuff that's provable that we can bring a lawsuit in to be able to move forward with action. And depending on the situation, we'll also kind of put up consumer alerts to let folks know and give people a heads up on bad things that are happening that may not necessarily be ripe yet for litigation, but involves illegal conduct nonetheless. And one thing that's just super important, and I think the last thing I'll just emphasize is working with consumer advocates, community-based advocates, who are really the best source of information of what's happening on the ground around misconduct that impact consumers. And so as I wrap up, again, I just want to thank all of you who are part of this, and happy to engage with you both on this panel as well as after this call if there are things that we can do. Turn it back to the moderator.
Thank you, City Attorney. Oh, sorry, there seems to be serious echo. Not sure what it is, but I want to ask a question. City Attorney, we have people, advocates from all over the country. We have tips for how to work with their local agencies that are like yours, and work with them or collaborate and get the word out about the types of that agencies like yours see.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I should say is I've always been surprised at how unfrequently city attorneys and county councils, and also for that matter, district attorneys, do not use consumer tools that are available to them to move forward. So, there are typically laws on the books all over the country that protect consumers. And generally, city attorneys and county councils, along with attorney generals and DAs, have at least some ability to go after companies, organizations, and individuals that are engaged in consumer fraud. So what I would say for all of you in your various jurisdictions, I would pull together a group of consumer advocates and request a meeting with your city attorney, your county council, your DA, and just ask what sort of tools do you have to grapple with this, and if you have a lawyer in your midst who's aware of other tools that these offices may not be using, you sort of encourage them to do that. I would also say, though, if you are in a state that does not have, say, the robust tools that we have in California, you may want to think about how to work with those offices or work with state or local legislators to enact laws that then allow offices like ours to sue. So the tools that we have are established under local or state law, and so they have to be enacted laws that we can use to bring an action against a bad actor. But I would be very surprised if many of these tools don't exist for public attorneys to be able to utilize. And as I said before, the tools that public attorneys have are often, we have both investigation tools as well as more remedies that are available to us to be able to pursue bad actors and to really bring justice for consumers.
Thank you so much, City Attorney. And Monica, I'll turn it back to you for more questions.
Yeah. Thank you, David. We had somebody ask if you could talk about the forum you did with the FTC addressing frauds against Asian Americans.
Sorry, Monica, sorry to interrupt. We all have an echo. Maybe if we keep our microphones off if we're not speaking.
So I think I heard the question, which is if I could talk about a forum that I did with the FTC in California around fraud. And let me just first start by thanking the FTC and CFPB for not just for your leadership at the federal level, but for your engagement at more local levels, at the state level and at our city level to help educate folks on what their rights are and what's out there. The FTC obviously has national, I don't want to speak for them, but has an understandably national perspective on, for example, the incredible level of billions of dollars of consumer fraud that are happening. And we were approached because not only is fraud happening all over the place, all the time, in all sorts of, unfortunately, innovative ways, but they are the fraud actors are in particular targeting monolingual communities, immigrant communities, in ways that are truly pernicious. And so we did a forum in San Francisco that was really meant as a kind of a Northern California education effort to alert the public on what has been happening and to educate particularly immigrant communities, monolingual communities of what to look out for. We did it inviting ethnic press to hear about specific ways in which the API community was being targeted, and sort of laying out what things for folks to look out for and what to do if you are defrauded. So for example, there are kind of specific ways in which Asian seniors who are monolingual have been defrauded in various financial fraud situations, or situations that are culturally pernicious. In other words, taking advantage of some cultural expectations within our API community that has led to millions of dollars being stolen from Asian seniors. So just again, appreciate the FTC for your effort in this and our partnership in this, and I'm always happy to partner with state and federal agencies and community groups to put the word out on things that are happening.
David, also for you, somebody wanted to know if there are ever any circumstances when someone who's been could contact an attorney.
I'm so sorry, you cut out. Circumstances in which?
When someone who's been scammed should contact an attorney as opposed to just reporting it to an agent.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I suggest that if you have been scammed, particularly of a significant amount of money, you should reach out to both government agencies, but also if you're inclined to reach out to private attorneys. You know, depending on the level that you have been scammed by, private attorneys, and I speak obviously as a representative of the legal community, are able to take cases or not take cases depending on the facts, depending on the law, and depending on whether the amount of time it might take to recover a certain amount of money is going to get paid for eventually. And so it really sort of depends, you know, if you have been defrauded from, you know, $250, it's probably not going to be worth the time of an attorney to bring that case unless the attorney can identify hundreds of folks who've been defrauded $250 or $500. On the flip side is if someone has stolen $100,000 from you, I definitely recommend talking to a lawyer to see if they can be helpful. And I think there's no downside with reaching out to both private sector attorneys as well as public law offices like ours. Our office, we have had a robust consumer practice, but we have limited resources like any government agency. And so we have to carefully pick and choose who we are going to pursue. And typically those decisions, as you can imagine, are based on how egregious the behavior was, how much money is at stake, how many consumers there are involved, how provable the case is, how strong the law is, what the remedies are that's available to us. We go through a pretty significant process internally to make a decision to go after bad actors. And all the cases that I mentioned, for example, on one of the slides of cases we brought this past year, part of what we're trying to do is, again, go after bad actors who are defrauding our local communities in significant ways with cases that are provable and cases that we want to uplift and publicize to the public so they understand what a bad actor is doing and set an example for other bad actors out there who might be doing or engaged in similar activity. I'll mention the notario fraud case, which was the immigrant legal services fraud situation. Unfortunately, throughout the country, there's almost a cottage industry of fake immigration consultants, individuals who pretend to be lawyers, who take thousands of dollars from immigrants and end up getting those folks deported, stealing their money, and then doing it again. And that's a very particularly pernicious area of consumer fraud in the immigration law context. And so we brought this case against this individual because we want to make it very clear to the public that if anyone engages in this, we will enforce the law in that area. But my office, we are constrained by our budget and by our staffing. And so it's really important for there to be private attorneys who do this work as well as government entities.
Thanks, David. Another question is if we all get the scam messages from our banks or financial institutions. If somebody does get that message and they report it to their bank, would they also be reporting to the FTC or the CFPB, or will the bank be working with those agencies or dealing with that?
I'm not sure if there's someone from the
Chanel?
FTC who wants to
Yeah.
answer.
Yes, hi, this is Larissa, and I'll let Chanel chime in.
I'm
I
sorry,
think
the
I-
echo is really strong and I could not hear the question.
Yeah, so let's all unmute ourselves so that just one person is unmuted at a time. Sorry.
Should I repeat the question?
Yeah, and
Yes,
then we'll all
please.
unmute for the question.
Okay.
I mean, mute for the question.
Okay, if we're all getting the scam messages from our banks on our phones and everything, and somebody wants to know if they report that scam text to their financial institution directly, do they need to still, or should they still be reporting it to the FTC or the CFPB, or will the bank be taking care of that? Is that the only person they have to report it to?
You know, I'm not an attorney on our team, but for this kind of approach, I would say more is more. There is absolutely no harm in bringing it to both your bank and then also to the FTC as well through their complaint system. And if you feel like your bank has unfairly handled or mishandled your complaint, then you can absolutely also file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
And I would agree with that from the FTC. It could also very well be an imposter scam. So we would appreciate hearing about that report. So thank you for the question.
Great. Where would somebody report specifically a foreclosure rescue scam? They say they've been seeing a lot of those in the last couple of years where distressed homeowners are being charged thousands of dollars, but not being provided any help.
I would say that you could file that complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, especially if you suspect that your mortgage lender has acted incorrectly.
Okay, great. And this is sort of a general question, open to everybody. What steps should someone take if they feel they're being scammed?
This is Larissa. One thing I will say is if the person has paid the scammer, it's really important to act quickly. So the first thing I would say is if someone thinks they have paid a scammer or believes that they have, it's really important to take quick action and try to stop the transaction. Unfortunately, the scammers often use payment mechanisms that are not traceable, and that's on purpose. So, you know, they'll payment by cash, by wire, by cryptocurrency, peer-to-peer app. So, you know, there are steps that one could take. By gift card is another one. We have a resource, What to Do If You've Paid a Scammer, that is available at ftc.gov/languages that says what to do depending on the method of payment. And for example, if it's by gift card, you want to contact the issuer as quickly as possible to see if that transaction can be stopped. So it's very important to take quick action, especially if money has been involved, and to report it. Report to the FTC, report to any of the agencies here
Great,
on the webinar.
great. Anyone else? Okay. Do any of the agencies have data on what parts of the country are most targeted for scams or where they're most prevalent?
That's a very good question. I don't have an answer for what part of the country. This is Larissa from the FTC, but I can tell you that in the data we collected in 2023, we know that we received 2.7 million reports about fraud, and it amounted to 10 billion in losses. And as Chanel said at the outset, we know that these reports are tip of the iceberg. It's, by and large, it's underreported, the losses that people are experiencing. So I can't point to particular areas of the country, although we do have public data available. It's called Tableau Public, where one can look through each state and even drill down to metropolitan area to see the categories of fraud that are affecting each state. And the leader is imposters. Other than identity theft, imposter as a fraud category is the lead category of fraud reports that we are seeing. And it has been for the last several years.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. And that is that people who are the victims of scams sometimes then have their bank account frozen by the bank because of fraud. What can be done to protect people from harm by their financial institutions in these situations where they are actually the victims of the scam?
Chanel, is this something you can speak on? So I'll give Chanel a chance to chime in. This is Larissa again from the FTC. I think it's very important to establish the communication channels with the bank. If it's our elders who are affected, to be talking directly to folks at your local branch, explaining what has happened. If our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our loved ones are affected by a scam, to explain what has happened and to put a face to what has occurred and to try to find solutions. And I know the CFPB tries to work with the bank. So I'll let Chanel chime in if she would like.
It seems that Chanel dropped off, but we do have Carmen Cruz with the CFPB who was here to offer support as well. Carmen, if you're there, do you have any information on how the CFPB can help on this? She may have stepped away, but Monica, did you say that was the last question that you had?
Yeah, it is.
I did want to ask before we leave, and then just in case the CFPB gets back on, for Kathy, you all have a hotline. Anyone can call your hotline, I know that. What languages are you able to help people in? And also I wanted to ask about the podcast you mentioned that's on scams. If you could tell us about that.
Sure. I'll take the last first. We have a podcast called The Perfect Scam. You can get it anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also go to aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork and access it that way if you'd like. Yes, we do have, it's not a hotline, it's a helpline, so it's not a 24/7 thing, but between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, we are able to take calls from anybody that is concerned about a scam or a fraud. If they've experienced one and they're not sure what to do, or if a family member is caught up in something, or if you just want to report it, and we report that data back to our friends at the Federal Trade Commission. It's a really great resource, and you don't have to be a member, you don't have to be of a certain age, and there is a language like interstitial, so if you speak a different language, there's a way to be able to have the conversation in one of like 250 plus languages.
Thanks so much, Kathy. And then I'll go ahead and wrap up. We didn't hear, we may have lost the connection with the CFPB, but I would say that if I got a call like that, we do get calls all the time from consumers. I definitely encourage them to file a complaint with the CFPB if their bank is unfairly freezing their money. And also, as City Attorney David Chu said, depending on the amount, you will want to potentially contact a private attorney. One good resource for finding consumer attorneys is the National Association of Consumer Advocates. They're at consumeradvocates.org, and you can find consumer attorneys that work on consumer issues throughout the country through them. That's just a resource, and that's what I would recommend if somebody called us with that kind of a problem. So thank you for bringing up that question. And I'll go ahead and wrap up. I just have a couple of wrap-up slides. We remind everyone that we are a national nonprofit, and there's always a way to make a contribution to us. If you want to support our work, you can do it online or by mail. And then also, there's a way to support our work without spending a cent, and that is by subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on social media. Thank you all for being on. Speakers, thank you so much for being on. We had a little bit of a rough start at the beginning there technically, but I think it turned out to be a great conversation. We hope you can come back. Any final thoughts from anyone as we wrap up?
Thank you, Consumer Action, for hosting and for all the advocates for attending. It's a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you all. See everyone next time.